Careful.
Strange New Worlds Episode Review. I would like the review to go now.
Where we're going, we won't need eyes to see.
Well, here we are, once more onto the Strange New Worlds, or to be much more accurate, wow, they actually put a Strange New World in my Strange New Worlds. What a twist! Before I get too far into it, though, this is the third season, the 5th episode, the one otherwise entitled Through the Lens of Time, and much like time demons themselves, spoilers do lie ahead. So take that as your warning. Now let's crack on with the show. Look, a strange new world. Although technically it's actually a strange, really old world with new inhabitants, but you know what? I'm gonna take it. +1 for the Strange New Worlds column. While I ultimately did really like this episode once it actually got to the damn episode itself, there were definitely still some pretty big issues with it, so I guess we can start there. They really came to us here with some pretty darn intriguing elements, but in order to get to the good stuff, we had to wade through a good 10 minutes of painfully awkward and incredibly unrealistic relationship-adjacent conversations. I personally don't really need to hear about how La'an and Spock are just hooking up without labels, and with Chapel, I feel like I am officially on the same page as both Spock and, you know, the Time Door.
Well, if the door liked me, then it's done liking me now.
Thankfully, these moments were broken up by some much better time spent with the finally named Gamble. Perfect timing to give him the names, no notes. While I really enjoyed his entire story throughout this episode, I can't help but feel like they wasted a ton of potential here. These are not the old days of the 90s or early 2000s when they were making those classic Trek shows, where they don't have to constantly pump out weekly Trek series where they're barely managing to keep up. They don't even know what 2 stories ahead are going to be. We don't live in those times anymore. They knew coming into this season from the very get-go that Gamble was going to play an important role in this episode. They had him cast. They had him the entire time. They had the whole season planned from the get-go, and they did not utilize him whatsoever. They knew he was going to come here to die, although I do have thoughts on that as well. I'll get to those later on. And they didn't do anything meaningful enough with him throughout the rest of the series to really warrant him here as such a mainstay of this crew. Yes, what happens to him still definitely hits and it still works, but they really could have woven him into the show throughout the last, I guess, 3 episodes, since he couldn't have been in the premiere, to really make this one hit much harder. Instead, it's little more than what they did back in the days of Voyager with Durst, where he basically exists 1 episode prior to his death to let us know he's on the crew, but they didn't really have time to build him up as anything more than that. We even have to have a Pike moment thrown in here to give us some nice exposition as to just how important of a character he is to an Mbenga, instead of, showing us that connection over a couple of episodes. Which brings us back nicely to the stuff you're probably actually here for. Just what the heck's going on with this planet? So, according to Korby's research...
And according to my research, bacteria are germs.
The delicious meringue-based confectionery inhabitants of this world were originally beings who crossed multiple galaxies before getting here. Or, as they would say in the JJ films. We also have the added context from Wedding Bell Blues that Rhys Darby's Maybelline stated that the planet was the old homeworld, leading to the rampant online speculation that he meant the Q homeworld, which is where we find ourselves now. After our landing party engages in some incredibly dubious sci-fi archaeology, they find themselves trapped in some form of video game puzzle dungeon. Meanwhile, Gamble opens the pack of a dead relic hunter and, no, not her, and immediately detonates a Pa-Wraith grenade right in his face. Here is where some interesting questions start to arise. What the heck is going on with him? Did he die instantly? His body was certainly dead the whole time, but was he immediately possessed by the Pa-Wraith? The Vesda Pa? Which brings us along nicely to the Pa-Wraith and Prophet question. They were obviously trying to use similar stuff here. Ancient tablets, energy beings being held inside them in a cave-esque structure, a seeming battle between good and evil, which also brings us to Batel and the Gorn, which I'll have to come back a little later to as well. Is Strange New Worlds attempting to not only connect Q and Trelane, but to give us an origin story which also connects all of this into the Prophet mythology from DS9? I can certainly see this as not being implausible, I guess you could say, but it does run the risk of being dangerously close to removing just a lot of the fun and the mystery from the Trek universe. While I didn't personally dislike linking Q and Trelane, I never really want to know how the Q came to be, knowing that's going to just remove such a large chunk of the fun and the mystique from what's going on in the wider scoping Trek world. And that same kind of thing goes for the Prophets. I already enjoyed them much more when they were just these strange, imperceptible, non-linear beings. But when they started adding such a pedestrian good and evil aspect to the Pa-wraiths, that's really when it started to become too much of a known quantity and less unexplainable to me. And I like to have these things that just are so out there you don't really know what's going on from our tiny little, I was going to say lizard brains, but I guess technically we have mammal brains as well. Chimp brains, perhaps. Evolved chimp brains. What am I even talking about right now? Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. It's implied in this episode that the evil entities within the sphere holding cells are actually hitchhikers or parasites. And assuming that this temple is actually created by Proto-Q in their Stargate Ancient-esque quest to ascend, then what are these evil creatures? Are they just an evolutionary offshoot? Are they Q ascension gone wrong and only a partially successful version of that? Or are they actually just something encountered on a different dimensional plane during this Proto-Q research? Now, since the Pa-wraiths and the Prophets are non-linear, they would have always existed technically, just springing into eternity from their point of creation, meaning that it would actually not be possible to travel back in time to a point before they existed. Potentially, of course, because we really don't know how any of that works. So even if they were a creation of this experiment, by their very nature, they would also exist prior to the experiment, which is sort of exemplified in this episode by Spock with the whole effect can predate cause when you're playing in the planes. So who's really to say what's going on here? Maybe the parasites they encountered were due to their meddling, but because of the nature of their reality, they were just there before the moment of their creation. Or could it be that the Q themselves are what is considered the hitchhikers and parasites? Maybe the true original people who did fully ascend and, I don't know, went off to whatever planes they're currently existing on, maybe they were the ones that were thinking of the Q themselves as the horrible mistake, and we're just seeing it through our eyes, knowing that the Q are these great things, but they are actually the mistake and the problem. While all of this is fun to think about, as I said earlier, I'm not really sure I want a definitive answer to any of it. I'm also not sure they intend to give us one. They certainly jumped through hoops earlier in the season in Wedding Bell Blues to never distinctly reference Q or Trelane by their identifiers, so they're possibly just trying to code in as much lore as they can without coming down on either side of the equation to give us fans something to chew on. And if that's the case, I really have to ask the question, what's the point of even doing it at all? If they're not going to give us an answer definitively, but they want to try and give us an answer by having us do the work, what's the point of telling these stories instead of going out and doing something completely unrelated to prior lore whatsoever? While we're asking questions, what's the deal with the Gorn and these Vesda beings? Were the Gorn bred to be on the hunt for them for some reason? And I know I jokingly said in one of my earlier videos that I believe Batel is going to be, sent to the very far future in order to cure her from her Gorn hybridization. But what if she ends up being sent to the far-flung past instead and becomes the actual very beginning of this whole relationship? I guess we'll have to wait to find out. And also, what's going on with Pelia? She's never around, and when she is, all they do with her is just give her Guinan storylines. First, she was created to be the long-lived character our crew could go back and meet when they were stuck in the past, and now, much like Elorians in the Q, the Lanthanites and the Venzas, or whatever the heck we're calling them now, have some sort of ancient existential feud as well. So is Pelia just a knockoff Guinan because they didn't want to use a Guinan, but they had nothing else for her to do? Seems like a waste, and why is she even still on the show at this point, since they definitely want to just get rid of her and play with Scotty right now? Anyway, lack of prior developments aside, I really enjoyed the Deadite Gamble story. I personally don't think he's gone for good. They made a very distinct choice in this episode to show that the energy entering him in the temple, the one coming out of the grenade and going through his eye holes, that was orangish, a completely different color from the end of the show when they showed us that the energy was being stored in the pattern buffer coming out of him. That was more of a whitish color. And then we also got to see that something later on was affecting the ship's computers. While it may actually be the evil entity as we were probably being led to believe, what if it's not? What if it's actually Gamble's soul, essence, consciousness, personality, whatever you want to call it, which is also trapped outside of his body. At least that's kind of what I'm assuming at this point, that he is coming back in some form, but obviously he's not coming back in the body that's really toast right now. It was already dead, and then, Pelia shot him in the back, so probably not a good day to be Gamble's body right now. Oh, and speaking of souls, I did find it kind of ironic for Korby to ask Spock,
"You don't think that the science exists to prevent our consciousness from fading?"
when he comes from one of the species in Star Trek who literally stores and preserves their souls. What's the deal with the Chinese language being in this grand ancient temple? Are we supposed to believe that these beings had dealings with ancient Earth? Is that what they're trying to imply here? Or is this place adapting to who it senses inside of itself by, let's say, implementing a language that would be understood by whoever was perceiving this specific console? While I assume Uhura probably also reads and speaks Chinese, but it was interesting and kind of way too coincidental that this language that would only be spoken by one of the people in this group here, again, aside from Uhura, who probably knows 72 languages, so if it read her mind, it wouldn't know what to do. But it was just very convenient that this language popped up in the room that could be read by the person in that room, and had she been in the other room, was Spock going to figure it out? Was Korby going to figure it out? Was Brotagus going to figure it out? No. So it just seemed a bit coincidental and convenient that this language was here, unless there was something else going on. Oh, and do we know if the being was actually just messing with Mbenga in like the style of The Omen? Or is it possible that when his daughter was taken way back in season 1, that she didn't have the happy ending that we were meant to believe? I hope that's not the case. I really hope this thing was lying just to kind of get a rise out of him. But A, why would it do that? Did these things eat bad emotions or something? Did they feed on fear and remorse and all that stuff? Or was he just doing it to be kind of a huge dick? Or is it possible that it knows more about the universe and realizes there was another malevolent being out there that just kind of ate up his daughter and wore her skin, as he said, which is not a great thought I want to apply retroactively to that episode, but I suppose here we are now. Overall, I did really have fun with this one. It could have been a lot better. It's definitely probably my favorite of this season so far. That being said, I am finding season 3 to be the weakest of Strange New Worlds so far, at least currently. Maybe once it finishes, I'll have different thoughts on that. If they traded those 10 or so wasted minutes at the very beginning for a more fleshed out temple adventure, or more of a creepy interactive gamble possession story, I definitely think that it could have played a little bit better, but it was such a disconnect with that just awkwardness at the beginning with the actual meat of the story here. And it definitely felt like the temple was a bit too easily solved. As I said earlier, it was much more of a video game puzzle quest than a real seeming in the real world type of a quest. But what did you think of this one? Do you think they're actually giving us a Q origin arc? What do you think of the whole gamble situation? And where the heck are we going next, aside from what we've already seen in the trailer, which is Patel standing in front of a portal and the goofy 4.5 Vulcans episode? Whatever you think, leave all that down below. And while you're there, like, share, subscribe, join, and do all those YouTube things. But until next time,
Showing weak, please hit subscribe.